The committee room fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her voice steady and clear as she presented her evidence on voting rights violations. But Texas Senator Ted Cruz had other plans. Within seconds of her opening statement, he interrupted with a sharp point of order. The room turned to watch as Cruz, his signature smirk already forming, prepared to dominate yet another hearing. What happened next would shock everyone in that room. Cruz thought he could steamroll the freshman congresswoman from Texas with his usual tactics. He interrupted her 6 times in the first 10 minutes, each interruption more aggressive than the last. But Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire career. When Cruz made his 7th attempt to silence her, what came out of her mouth left the entire committee speechless and turned Cruz's own strategy against him in the most devastating way possible. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, hit that like button if you want to see more political moments like this, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest congressional drama. Now let's see how a first-term representative from Texas absolutely destroyed one of the most seasoned politicians in Washington. The hearing was supposed to be routine. The Committee on the Judiciary had gathered to discuss new voting legislation, and Crockett, serving on her first major committee, was presenting research she'd spent months compiling. Her brown suit was pressed perfectly, her notes organized, her voice confident. She'd practiced this presentation dozens of times, but Ted Cruz had been watching from across the room, his arms crossed, that familiar calculating look in his eyes. The Texas senator had built his entire career on moments like this, finding young Democrats and making examples of them in front of the cameras. At 53, Cruz had earned a reputation as one of the sharpest legal minds in the Senate, someone who could slice through arguments with surgical precision. Crockett was everything Cruz loved to target, young, passionate, and representing a district that had flipped from red to blue. At 33, she was exactly the kind of progressive voice that Cruz made his living opposing. She'd been a civil rights attorney before winning her seat, but committee hearings were different from courtrooms. This was Cruz's domain. As Crockett began reading her opening statement about voter suppression data, Cruz leaned forward in his chair. He'd done this dance 100 times before. Wait for the perfect moment, interrupt with a procedural question, throw the speaker off their rhythm, and then dominate the conversation. It was a strategy that had worked against dozens of Democratic representatives over the years. The cameras were rolling. The room was packed with staffers, reporters, and advocacy groups. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes moment that could make or break a political career. Cruz knew it. Crockett knew it. Everyone in that room could feel the tension building. Ted Cruz sat at the committee table like a predator sizing up its prey. His Harvard law degree gleamed in his background, his years as Texas Solicitor General giving him the kind of courtroom confidence that had intimidated countless witnesses. He'd argued 9 cases before the highest court in the land, written best-selling books, and run for president. In his mind, facing a first-term representative should be easy work. Cruz had built his entire political brand on moments exactly like this one. He was the constitutional conservative who could out-debate anyone, the legal scholar who could find the flaw in any argument, the seasoned politician who knew exactly how to use procedure to control the narrative. His supporters loved watching him dismantle liberal arguments on live television, but what Cruz didn't fully understand was exactly who he was dealing with. Jasmine Crockett hadn't stumbled into Congress by accident. She'd spent years as a civil rights attorney, arguing cases in courtrooms across Texas, defending clients against some of the most powerful legal teams in the state. She'd won cases that everyone said were impossible to win. Crockett had grown up in St. Louis, earned her law degree from the University of Houston, and spent years fighting voter suppression cases long before she ever thought about running for office. She'd faced down hostile judges, aggressive opposing counsel, and courtrooms full of people who underestimated her because of her age and appearance. The stakes in this hearing couldn't be higher. The voting rights legislation they were discussing could affect millions of Americans across the country. But more than that, this was about power. Cruz represented the old guard, the establishment politicians who'd controlled these committees for decades. Crockett represented a new generation of leaders who weren't willing to be silenced or intimidated. The voting rights bill on the table would expand access to early voting, increase poll monitoring, and crack down on voter intimidation. Tactics. For Cruz, this represented everything he opposed about federal overreach. For Crockett, it was about protecting the fundamental right that democracy depends on. Cruz had already made it clear in pre-hearing interviews that he planned to expose what he called the radical agenda behind the legislation. He'd done his research on Crockett, studied her background, and identified what he thought were weaknesses in her legal arguments. In his mind, this hearing was an opportunity to score political points against the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But Crockett had done her homework too. She'd studied Cruz's tactics, watched hours